Hello, we're going to talk about SOAP and REST web services and how isCOBOL Service Bridge will help you get there. Web services is a way to exchange data on the internet between two programs that may not be written in the same language. In a web service, there is a server-side program and a client-side program. The server side is always running and accepts requests and provides a response. The client side requests data from the server and it consumes it. Each side can run separately, with each communication as a standalone process, which is stateless, or as a continuous connection with multiple back and forth communications between the two sides, which is stateful. The buffer between your program and the communicating program is called an API. It does things like check security and change data to the format needed before passing it back and forth. This is the piece that isCOBOL provides with our service bridge. The service bridge uses the linkage section of your COBOL program to handle the communication from an internet client or server. One of your first decisions is whether to use the SOAP protocol or the REST architecture. SOAP web services communicate using WSDL, WSDL. It's a specific SOAP language and it passes data in XML format. REST web services uses HTTP protocol and it can pass data in a lot of ways, including XML and JSON. SOAP and REST can both be stateless or stateful, but traditionally SOAP is stateful, which means it connects and keeps track of a set of transactions, while REST is traditionally stateless. The requester connects, gets its information, and exits. SOAP is more complex, but is thought to be more secure. REST is easier because it has looser rules, but its security is still good using HTTPS. Generally, many companies use SOAP for internal or more complex internet communication, but if you're looking at a public API, it will probably be a REST. Examples of SOAP APIs are PayPal's public API and Salesforce. We also have a sample that uses an online SOAP web service that converts an IP address to a geographical location. Examples of public REST APIs are Twitter, WordPress, Google Maps, and Facebook. The isCOBOL compiler uses the Service Bridge facility to generate and compile a bridge program that accepts data from your COBOL program, converts it to a format the calling application can understand, and passes it along. It also accepts data from the calling application, converts it to COBOL data format, and passes it back to your program. What is passed between the two is dictated by the API, the rules about what the program can do. Your COBOL program's rules are your linkage section, what data it can accept in, and what format that data must be in, and what it can return and what format it will be returned in. So let's get to the demonstration. Now I've got the isCOBOL IDE up, version 2019 R1 is what I'm using, and we're going to be using our web service bridge samples. In the File tab, I'll right-click and import, and you can see that we're in the General area, Existing Projects into Workspace. Click on Next. I will browse to my Veryant installation. The 2019 R1, and then Sample, Projects, EIS, because Web Services is under the EIS umbrella, and Web Service. These two examples are the COBOL program as a client calling an existing REST and SOAP web services. We're going to create a web service that can be called, so we want to go to the bridge, and I'll start with SOAP. I'll select the folder. There are two projects. One is the one that we want, the Sans SOAP. The other one is a Java Bean program. It's a way to test your program. We're going to test it a different way, so I won't bring that in. And I definitely want to copy the projects into my workspace. I don't want to overwrite the installed version. Click on Finish. And let's take a look at our source code, sans.cbl. At the beginning of the program, we have set several variables. 3 of these have to do with the bean, and so we don't need them. And then 3 of them are set below, We're setting the style to document. We're telling the compiler that we want it to create the bridge program by setting service bridge to 1. And we're starting with this URL, which we will talk about later. This program has one data file, a sans data file, and we're going to populate it from working storage. And then in our linkage section, remember this is how our web service is going to communicate back and forth. We have 3 O1 levels. One is an opcode that is mandatory and it tells the program what it's going to do. The next one is the SON data itself, and the final one is the return status. Now you notice these ELK directives here. These are already in the sample for you to use, but let me show you how you can put them in there. We're giving it a nice name of operation. It's an input field, meaning that it has to be input into the program. There's no output, and it is mandatory because otherwise the program won't know what to do. So I'm going to delete those 3 and save it, and now I want to put them back in. So I'm going to right-click on the source code and go to Open isCOBOL Service Editor, and you can see it picked up some of the variables that we set at the top of the program. Enable service, SOAP, document, and the URL. I don't want the bean again, so I'll uncheck that. And then we'll go to our data map. Here are our 3 O1 level sections. And we need to define whether the value is going to come in or go out, input or output for each one of these sections. So the ELK directives told the wizard here that the SON data was going to be both input and output, and the return status was going to be output only. But it didn't say what to do with the opcode, so the wizard gave us input and output. Now we know that the opcode has to come in and does not go out, so I'm going to click on the output and delete it. And I'll double click on the input, and we can set the name to operation, and we can set mandatory. It's already set to input. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to save everything. And when I go back to my program, there are my 3 ELK directives that have been put in by that wizard. So we're ready to build this. I'm going to right-click on the project name, go down to Build Project. It's building down here in the bottom right, and now it's created another program called SOAP Sans. This is your bridge program. Let's take a look at that. There's a lot of data here, but the part that I want to review is here. We're going to accept in XML format some data. We're going to move the data to variables that are COBOL friendly, and then we will call the program sans with that data. Then we're going to take the data that comes back and put it into the XML format as defined by our WSDL, and we'll display the XML. We'll send it back. So that's what it's doing. As well as creating that source code, it also compiled it. So we have our SOAP Sans class and our Sans class. It also created a WSDL. So we'll look at that, and you can see it's an XML format. Now because this is our service, we needed to create the WSDL. If we were consuming someone else's service, we would use their WSDL. And in order to use an outside WSDL, you need to use our Stream to Work utility to convert the WSDL into a working storage COBOL code copybook. So before we start this program, we have a couple things to do. When running your web service in the IDE, it names the web service test HTML, and it chooses a random port to run it on. But I want to specify my port. So I'm going to go to Window and Preferences. And under isCOBOL, run/debug, here's my port number. I'm going to click on Use the following port number. Let's use 12345. I'll apply. And now we need to go into our isCOBOL properties and put that port number into our URL. It also needs the path to the data folder here, because remember it's going to create that sans data. So I will put my path in, and the IDE knows that I need to escape these backslashes, so I'm going to accept that. And I'll save my isCOBOL.properties, and now I'm ready to start the service. So I'll right-click on the project, come down to Run As, and I want to run it as an isCOBOL EIS servlet. You'll see it start down here in my console, and it will display in my browser. So now our SOAP service is running. We need a client to talk to it. One of the best ways to test your SOAP web service is to use SOAP UI, a free tool that will act as a client. So under File, I will create a new SOAP project. I'll call it Sans. And it's going to need that WSDL that was created. So I'll browse to my output folder, and I'll choose my WSDL. Say OK. And it creates a default request based on that WSDL. So I'll extend out to that request. We'll need to change some things here. Remember, our port number was 12345. And our name is always going to be, when we run from the IDE, test HTML. And it is an EIS servlet, so servlet is appropriate. Now before I run this, remember we have a mandatory field, and it's this operation field. So let's get the first record. We'll pass an F, and let's run it. And there's our data. There's our first record. So our web service is working fine. Let's get the last one just to test it one more time. There's our last record. So that's our SOAP web service working. Now let's change to a REST web service, and we'll see what the difference is. I'm back to my IDE. I have clicked on this button to stop the service, and I'm going to clear up my console. And I will right-click and import an existing project. And this time, I'm going to browse to my REST folder. Sample, Projects, EIS, Web Service, Bridge, and REST. I'll select the folder, take off the Java Bean because I don't want to test with that. I have another way of testing. And I'm going to copy the projects into the workspace. Click on Finish, and here we have our Sans REST. Now it has the same sans.cbl. The only difference are the settings at the top. We don't need the bean. We do want to set the service bridge to 1 so that we get our bridge program generated. And the service bridge type we have to set to REST because the default is SOAP. We have the same data file. And this sample also tests printing, which I'm not going to do in this video. You see we have the same data we're going to put into the file. And we have the same ELK directives. If I were to delete these, I would get the same result if I went down to the Open isCOBOL Service Editor, just as we did last time. It picked up that it was a REST, and it's enabled. We don't want the Java Bean. In our data map, we have an opcode operation that's input, return status that's output, and the SON data that is both input and output. So that's perfect. Save all. Let's build our project to get our service bridge program. You can see it building down here. And it's created our bridge program called REST Sans. Let's take a look at that. The code is a little different because it reflects the REST specification instead of the SOAP specification. But in our main area, we are doing essentially the same thing. We're accepting the value in from the caller. We're moving it to some COBOL data types, and we're calling our program. We're taking the data that's returned and moving it out into, in this case, JSON, which we'll see later, and then we're pushing it back to the caller. In our output folder, we have both of the program Sans and REST Sans compiled, but we don't have a WSDL because REST doesn't use a WSDL. In this sample, we also have some HTML that help show you what to do with that data and how to make the calls. And just like the SOAP, we need to make a few changes. I've already set my Windows preferences, isCOBOL, run debug, default port. I'll keep that. And under resources, I need to change my isCOBOL properties. We'll put in our port number. And we need to change our file prefix. Cut and paste that. It tells me it needs to escape the backslashes. I'll let it do that. And I will save it all. And let's start our service. So we'll run again as an EIS servlet. You see it starting here in the console. And then here's my browser. And our HTML shows two different ways to display this data. So we'll go to Basic and look at our first. Now when I click on this, remember it's going to send this F operation code to the service. It gets this data returned and it puts it into my fields. I'm going to go back home and click on the rich HTML. You can see it's a little bit nicer. Now what's getting returned is JSON. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Instead of calling my HTML, I'm going to do something similar to what we did in SOAP UI. We'll go to Servlet, Sans, and we'll pass the operation L for last record. And here's our JSON. This is the last record. We can get our raw data here. And you can see that the JSON got its response with this data and this status. So that's some beginning information about how the web services work. Remember, we covered using a COBOL program as a web service to be contacted by a client. If you have any questions, please call or email us at the information on the slide, or you can email us at support@veryant.com.